When you look at this fight between Ortega and Zombie, where do you think it gets won? Like, what's the most key area that somebody has to dictate to win this fight?
Honestly, when I look at the matchup between the two, right, Zombie has like a complete skill set, and so does Brian Ortega. But where Brian Ortega struggled with Max Holloway was when he was forced to stand for an extended period of time. And I think that's the same type of situation he's going to find himself in with the Zombie. He's got to get this fight to the ground, and if not for keeping him there extended periods of time, he has to be able to mix it up to make the Korean Zombie not feel so comfortable on the feet, because that dude's a handful too. So ultimately, it's I know Brian Ortega knocked out Frankie Edgar, and sometimes you fall in love with the hands, but for him, he needs to get this fight to the floor, because if the Zombie can stay standing, he's very difficult.
We just found out the last couple of days, obviously, that Henner can't make it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from a fighter's point of view, like, how much difference can that make? I mean, I kind of like what Henner said, where he's like, dude, jiu-jitsu, you got it.
That was the most. I was on the plane with Brian Ortega over, and we were talking, and he was talking about his training camp and how well it went, and how Henner had his positive test weeks ago, right? But he's been kind of alternating positive and negative. And when you get to Vegas, if you're positive, you can't travel. It is what it is. But if there was one coach, and this is a mindset of Brian Ortega, right? If there's one coach that he had to go without, why? If it's the jiu-jitsu guy, he feels pretty confident. Because as we know, Brian Ortega is as talented a grappler as we have in the entire UFC. So, tough for a team, but it's like me not having a wrestling coach going into a fight. Right. So, it's best of the worst case scenario.
Does it change though? Like, because I get the feeling they're kind of like a mental relationship too, right? I mean, does that change anything?
Well, I mean, I just think that at this point, right, when you fought for a world championship, you know how to go fight, right? And what's normal? What's normal today, right? So to think that Brian Ortega is going into this fight and things don't feel normal, well, he's fighting in Abu Dhabi on Fight Island. There's a place called Fight Island that Brian Ortega is fighting the Korean Zombie, right? So what's normal in 2020? So this is kind of par for the course for all the fighters that are fighting on these cards. If something gets dealt your way, whatever. It's the way the world works today.
What's the key to this fight? Like, where is the most important, area of engagement that we need to watch out for?
Well, ultimately it's down to Brian Ortega to decide where he wants the fight to take place. What we know of Korean Zombie from back in the day, you go back to the Leonard Garcia fight in WEC, and that was an absolute war. But when he made his UFC debut, won by Twister. So we got two sides of the same coin of Korean Zombie. He can trade punches and get wild, but he can also submit you with a highly technical submission. The streak that he went on after that, knocking out Mark Hominick in 6 seconds, getting in there against Aldo and giving a good account of himself, I think it set him up for a good time away to reflect on where he's at and who he was as a fighter while the division was developing around him. When he returned to the UFC, he was a different individual. And what I like about the Korean Zombie, much like Justin Gaethje and the evolution that we've seen in him recently, he doesn't need to take punches. He's not there to be hit anymore. You watch the Moicano fight and he stands waiting, and it's one of the most beautiful knockouts I've ever seen, purely because he never takes his eyes off Moicano's chin. He waits for the shot to come. As the punch comes out, he slips and he watches his chin as he comes over and hits him with that laser focused right hand. The mentality of not caring about your own well-being and the damage you take to your face puts you in a very strong position to slip your head off the centre line and punish people for missing. We've seen that with Justin Gaethje recently. Korean Zombie turned that corner when he came out of the military and rejoined the UFC. So it's all about him standing his ground and waiting for Ortega to come to him. And what I like about Ortega as well, coming off his first loss, he will have definitely learned from that. We know he's got good boxing skills. We know he's got great ground skills as well. Zombie's a bit of an enigma on the ground. We don't know much about him on the ground, so I wouldn't mind seeing it hit the mat for a scramble. But in the striking ranges, it's Ortega drifting in and out of range and peppering him with boxing, while Zombie waits to knock him out with that one clean punch. They're very, very different strikers, very, very different approach to the game, but both highly skilled and highly technical. And I always get excited to see an undefeated fighter pick up a first loss and see what they change about their game, because we always see jumps in their game, evolutions, and Brian Ortega is the kind of guy that doesn't need to pick up second loss like Justin Gaethje did. A little bit hard-headed of him to go back into the next fight with the same style. I'm excited to see the developments in his game, and Korean Zombie's a legend. You know, he was a legend before he even signed his UFC contract because of that Leonard Garcia fight. So it'll be an honor to call that one.
Brian Ortega obviously has the traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu style of Korean Zombie, like you said, to pull off twisters and all kinds of. Do you view this as sort of a 10th Planet versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu style matchup?
It's definitely orthodox against unorthodox. Absolutely. What I like about Brian Ortega's style is obviously we know him as T-City, and he has got excellent submissions off his back. But it's his grip adjustments when he's on a guillotine, and the majority of the time he finds himself on a guillotine because people don't want to deal with his striking anymore. So I mean, I always say that the guillotine is the striker's submission. I've only got one submission on my record, and that was because the guy didn't want to kickbox with me anymore. You know, people run into guillotines when they exactly. Good example. But see, Brian Ortega's got a well-rounded ground game that he doesn't feel the need to use in every one of his fights. It's there in his back pocket if he needs it. But we also know that he can get fights stopped with strikes. What with Frankie Edgar, obviously the Clay Guida one stands out in my mind. Brian Ortega, he's a third round fighter. You know, he gets better as the fight goes on, but over 3 rounds, it puts a lot of pressure on him to get the finish in the 3rd round. Against Max Holloway, it felt like he started faster when he didn't need to, and Max Holloway builds as the fight goes on. So I was expecting the first couple of rounds to be quite cautious, and then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th to be pretty wild. I'm expecting that Brian Ortega this time around. I think he's going to be respectful of Zombie, of his punching power. I also think the enigma of Zombie's ground game is something to be wary of as well, and I think Ortega knows that. So I think we're going to get a striking extravaganza to start with, and if it hits the ground, it'll be because one's getting the better of the other. But as you said, with the twister, there's a difference between the twister and the go-go platter, for example, and a bunch of other submissions. Because if you're setting up a twister, your opponent knows what you're doing, like all the way through. There's like 4 or 5 different control points that you have to finish a twister. So for someone like Brian Ortega, he's going to look at that and think he's going to be able to read the ground game of Korean Zombie as it's coming. But because we just don't really know a great deal about it, and what we've seen in Zombie's last couple of fights is, you know, he knocks people down, then he takes their back and beats them up for a while. That's what I prefer to see in an MMA fighter, because submissions open up with strikes much, much quicker. And Brian Ortega liking to fight off his back might not be a good thing against Zombie, because Zombie's not going to be hanging out in his guard ready to get triangled. He's going to be raining down punches and elbows.
But don't forget, my friend, that you usually are wrong.
Yes, you must be all the time ready to. That's the way of warrior.
Legendary Polish power.
Us, thank you. All best for you.
When I hit Huma, I will be happy for this, you know.
No, man, I don't have bad blood with anyone.
I don't know. I don't think he's an easy fight right there. He's a bunch of killers.
Well, amazing feeling, you know?